The story of another Gwent Journey has come to an end. This time the story was about a sorceress named Alissa Henson, and a large part was about her education at the school of sorceresses, Aretuza. Throughout the story we get to meet famous magic users from the early years of the continent, as the story takes place somewhere between the year 900 and 1050. During this time there were a lot of sorcerers still alive, who by the current time in The Witcher would be legends. Mages like Bekker, who was assumed to be the first Nordling mage, and Klara Larissa de Winter, the sorceress who founded Aretuza. Many of the sorcerers mentioned in the story originate from the books. Alissa Henson herself, however, is not mentioned in the books. She was made up for this journey, but her aunt, Klara Henson, is mentioned a few times, as she was one of the founding members of the chapter of the gift and the art. Alissa was almost born to be a sorceress. From a very young age she was already destined to follow in her aunt's footsteps. And whilst Alissa looked forward to becoming a sorceress, she would have to wait until she was older. But unlike most adepts of Aretuza, Alissa was already very familiar with all the powerful sorceresses of her time. Every time her aunt would go to meet the other sorcerers who were part of the chapter, she would take Alissa with her, meaning that before Alissa was even able to walk, she had already met the likes of Herbert Stammelford, Ivo Richter, Agnes of Glenville, Geoffrey Monk, and Redmere of Tor Carnet. It was in the presence of these sorcerers that she had her conduit event, which showed her magical potential. In her case, as a very small child, she managed to use telekinesis to throw horse dung at Herbert Stammelford. The same Herbert Stammelford who was said to have moved a mountain because it obstructed his view from a tower. Alissa grew up with magic all around, and at the age of 11, the time came for her to start Aretuza, to become a sorceress herself. It was the day she had been waiting for since she was a toddler, and when she entered Aretuza, she was overwhelmingly awed by the beauty of it all. She couldn't control her excitement as she skipped around and grinned throughout the entire school. But soon her feelings of joy would turn into boredom, as the first few classes were tedious for her. She still liked talking about magic and practicing it, of course. However, the fundamentals they were taught she had known since she was very little. At the start of her studies, Alissa was in a group of 6 other adepts, which would soon become 5 others, as one of the students failed the entrance test of the school. The entrance test of Aretuza would change under each new headmistress, and when Alissa attended Aretuza, it was still Klara Larissa de Winter who led the school. In her time, the entrance exam existed out of evaluating shapes, patterns and elements, combined with random and peculiar questions and themes. With only 6 students in her year remaining, Alissa's group would join older students in their classes as there were not enough teachers at the school. In one of these lessons, Alissa befriended an older student named Kalena, who was in her 4th year at Aretuza. Kalena was caring, funny and friendly to Alissa, which was in big contrast to another student named Janna, who kind of became an enemy at the school. Janna had already graduated, and she was part of Aretuza's first class, meaning that she would help teachers and from time to time teach the young students. Alissa hated Janna's lessons, as in every single class she taught, she would find a reason to ridicule and scorn Alissa. A small mistake, a different opinion, and Janna would start ranting about how lackluster Alissa's capabilities were and give her punishments like cleaning the toilets. The school only had 4 official teachers, which were all called mistresses, and one of each specialized in the 4 primary elements: water, air, earth and fire. This means that due to lack of teachers, Alissa and the other students would often be taught by other students, which meant that she got a lot of classes from her enemy, Janna. The students would study the 4 aforementioned primary elements, and would, if they were successful, manage to master one. The only sorcerer who managed to master all 4 was Bekker, the first Nordling mage. And, like many students, Alissa wanted to become the second to master them all. At first, it started with the element of water, as it was considered the safest one of them all. This class was taught by Aurora, Alissa's aunt, was the resident mistress of water, which meant that Alissa would get lessons from her aunt. She had made it clear, before she went to Aretuza, that Alissa would not get beneficial treatment, which she herself also didn't want. Almost the entire first year was spent on the element of water, with a few air lessons from time to time. It was not long after the year had begun that students were tasked to navigate the caverns below Aretuza, to follow the water veins to the strongest point, where they would find a crystal to retrieve. Each student chose a tool to help navigate the tunnels. Most went with a water wand, which would locate the cross-sections of the water veins, but would not be able to notice where the power became stronger. With this in mind, Alissa decided to take a different tool with her, the school's cat, named Scoundrel, who possessed a magically enhanced lifespan. Cats are known to seek out places of powers, and thus the cat would be useful, at least if it wasn't for the rats and rodents in the cave. Scoundrel kept chasing them, and by the time Alissa had reached the crystals, only 2 remained. She was the second to last to return. However, as the sun went down, one student was still missing, Sorika, who was one of the oldest and brightest students of Alissa's group. Each year, 1 or 2 students would get lost in the caves below the school, but they would always find their way back to the surface eventually. However, Sorika never came back up at the usual time. The school's mistress of Earth, Nina Fiervanti, had mapped out most tunnels, but some went very deep and still left unexplored. That night, Nina Fiervanti took a group of older students with her and went down into the caves. They searched for 12 hours before they eventually found the girl. The very next day, Sorika left Aretuza. The girl was in a state of between petrified and paralyzed. There was something down in there, in those caves, which left her in that state. Soon after she left, the head mistress of the school, Klara Larissa de Winter, ordered the tunnel entrances to be closed indefinitely, and any time a student asked what was going on down there, the teachers refused to talk about it, and would scold anyone who brought it up. Alissa was the last girl to ever return with a crystal from those caves, as they never sent students down there ever again. After a year of water, it became time for Earth, which was taught by the same teacher who went to the caves for the missing girl. Nina Fiervanti was more focused on a hands-on approach. On the first months, she would task the students with digging at an excavation site. There was nothing of note there to be found, but it was supposed to teach the students to have patience, to work hard, and to be determined. And well, she quickly took a liking to Alissa, who without any hesitation jumped into the trench and started digging. Third came the element of air, taught by Agnes of Glenville, who was a good friend of Alissa's aunt, and thus she had met her dozens of times before. They knew each other well, and Alissa had great expectations of this element, as her conduit moment had to do with this specific element. Fourth came fire, the most dangerous primary element. Fire is chaotic and painful to learn. It is almost guaranteed that you'll get burned, and thus Klara Larissa de Winter taught only 1 student each year in this element. Klara might seem blunt and cold to most, but she cared a lot for her students of her school, as she was the founder. Because only 1 student would be taught in the element of fire, Klara had to test to see who was worthy. She would do this by extending her hand, and tell the students that whoever took her hand would be the student she thought. She would then engulf her hand in fire, blistering, burning and charring the skin of her hand. Instead of smooth skin, there were 5 molten fingers, waiting to be held by a student. Klara only wanted a student who would not be afraid to get burned. Other students thought it might have been a joke, but the winter was very serious, and thus Alissa slowly moved her hands towards hers, as she saw Klara's emotionless eyes looking at her, waiting. Alissa went for it, closed her eyes, grabbed the hand, was howling in pain. And so her lessons in fire started. Alissa has gotten quite a reputation at Aretuza. She stood out amongst the rest, partly because of her talent, and in part because she didn't have her appearance changed to be more beautiful. Alissa wanted to be herself, and not someone else. She didn't feel the need to have her appearance changed, maybe someday later, but she didn't care for it all that much, not even when her friend Kalena tried to convince her. It especially was often brought up when Alissa was going to represent Aretuza at the so-called Clash of Chaos, a yearly competition between Aretuza and Barnard to each year see which school was the better one. And in the 3rd year of her studies, Alissa was chosen to be the one to duel a student from Barnard. In the previous 2 years, it had been Janna, Alissa's enemy, who had been chosen. And now she was furious that Alissa had taken her place. There was a lot of pressure on Alissa to win, and she felt almost invincible. But she was wrong. Alissa faced off against a short boy called Garion, who, not for a second, would stop smirking. In preparation for the event, Klara herself had a daily one-on-one session with Alissa to help her prepare, on top of the classes she was supposed to follow. But the extra time spent preparing would not be of use during the duel. Garion opted to use illusions in the fight, which was not yet taught how to deal with to Alissa. No contestant had ever used this in a clash. All Alissa's energy went into taking down the illusions, which gave Garion the chance to hit her with a blast of air and launch her into a stone column, resulting in a victory for Barnard. Alissa hid in her room afterwards. She was afraid to face the ones she had disappointed, afraid of what her aunt would say. Whilst in her room, she was visited by her friend Kalena, who, after trying to comfort her for a bit, snapped out of frustration at Alissa's behavior. Kalena told her that she couldn't be the best at everything, and that while Alissa was talented, intelligent and determined, she was entitled. She shouldn't do everything to be the best. She should stop trying to impress others, and instead just be herself and enjoy it. The most important thing is that you yourself are happy. It started to change something in Alissa, and she decided to join Kalena, to go to the celebrations, where to Alissa's surprise, no one blamed her for losing. She would even go to have one of the best nights of her life there. In her 4th year, Alissa would get involved in a secret project with Nina Fiervanti, the Mistress of Earth. For years, Nina was investigating Lara and the strange magical disruption which turned any spells cast nearby into something far more dangerous than intended. Slowly for years, Nina had been imbuing the foundations of Lara and the Palace of Garstang with a unique aura that, once implemented, would block the use of magic there. No magic can warp if none can be casted. And so, Alissa became Nina's assistant, in the building of the magical barrier of Garstang. Alissa slowly started to doubt what she wanted, and in a moment of uncertainty, she did something stupid. Jan Bekker, the first mage to master all of the elements, went to visit Aretuza for a short time, to teach a few lessons, and most likely, as well, to see how they managed to be so orderly in contrast to the unruly Barnard boys. The last Clash of Chaos was won by Aretuza, which he used as an excuse to visit. In his opening speech, he instilled a feeling of wanting greatness once more in Alissa, which drove her to confront Kalena about her behavior, as Alissa was convinced that she wasn't trying her hardest. Kalena never wanted to be a powerful sorceress or master of everything. She wanted to help people as a Dwimviandra, one good deed at a time, and she decided to never return to Aretuza. Still with the words of Bekker in her mind, Alissa decided to end her friendship with Kalena, which she would later regret. She told Kalena that if she wanted to leave, she should go. After a heated discussion, Kalena burst out into tears and ran away to Lara. Here at the top of the tower, Alissa confronted her, but Kalena didn't want to talk. Kalena powered up the portal of Lara and went through it without a second thought, disappearing to an unknown location. No one went after her, due to the instability of the portal. For all they knew, she could be torn to pieces and spread across the planes of elements, or ended up in some inhospitable place. For years, Kalena was gone, and Alissa in that time realized her mistake. It would be some time until she once again received a bit of hope, during assignments to aid the priestesses of the temple in Olander, with healing the sick from a deadly disease. One dying man told Alissa about a traveling mage, a Dwimviandra, who passed through the village a year ago and aided them with livestock and crops. He didn't remember her name, but it was something started with a K. He told her that the mage was one of the kindest people he had ever met. This once again gave Alissa hope that Kalena was still out there, somewhere. Eventually Alissa would reach her final year of Aretuza, where she was supposed to act as a mentor to a new adept. And the adept given to Alissa was a girl called Skylark. The girl was brimming with enthusiasm for the gift in the art, and she was one of the most proper girls Alissa had ever met. The girl told her that if magic is chaos, that those who practice it should be orderly. This idea made Alissa think that this girl, Skylark, would eventually become a mistress of Aretuza, and she was right. For Skylark is in fact the sorceress, who would be later known as Alissa de Vries. Skylark made Alissa realize that she was missing something, and so Alissa did what had long been coming. She dropped out of Aretuza. She knew exactly what she wanted to become. After a heated discussion with Klara Larissa de Winter, who told Alissa that she was no longer welcome at the school, she left Aretuza for good, to become a Dwimveandra. As Alissa walked the continent to aid people, she eventually, as she got older, decided to collect the notes she had written over the years to write her memoir, as there had been a predicament that she wanted to write about, as there was something nefarious going on. The general attitude toward mages had shifted. A rude alderman had sent her away, because he didn't want her wicked kind in the village. This happened more often, and more villagers sent her away. Something was definitely wrong. Even the towns where she went often now refused her. She would around this time run into a young bard, who was afflicted by a curse which caused her to sing and rhyme every sentence. You might know her from the Witcher Journey as Galanthea, known also as Snowdrop. Galanthea and Alissa traveled together for a day, when Galanthea was on her way to Alzur in the hopes that he could cure her curse. During the time they spent together, Galanthea spoke to her about the events she had witnessed in a nearby town in the past week. One of the towns was a commotion, as a fawn had been slaughtered above the well, with its innards hanging out and its eyes missing. Soon came the specialists, who said they would find the culprit. They searched the entire town, thoroughly, until they eventually found the source of the problem, a witch who they captured and burned at the stake. Specialists claimed their coin, and left as quickly as they came. More and more tales started to spread of the wicked witches. Of course, sometimes mages in their pursuit of power and knowledge hurted people, but not this often, and not like this. Mages don't all turn evil overnight, and the reports were more numerous than the number of mages the continent at the time. This led Alissa to investigate what was going on, and why people were turning against mages, and who was the cause behind this strange phenomenon. Galanthea had given her a name that would lead Alissa to the source of this problem. Hale. And surely, the Hale family was the problem. Octavia Hale and her two sons would enter a town. Her son Fabian would sabotage something, plan something that looked like a ritual or magic, and then they would arrive to find a scapegoat who they burn alive at the stake, taking the money and quickly leaving. Alissa discovered that their schemes, and the Hales who had only dealt with fake witches were unprepared to deal with a true magic user, especially one was as skilled and gifted as Alissa. And so Alissa Henson exposed the Hales for the frauds they were, put them in chains to be shamed. What happened afterwards to Alissa is not known as of yet. Maybe that will come from another time. I'm glad Gwent has gone back to the text-heavy journey stories. It was of course fun to translate the images and to see some moments from the books depicted in image form. However, we get way more information through these types of journeys. This journey in particular took a lot of small quotes and references from the books and expanded upon it. The mages mentioned in the stories as teachers of Aretuza were the first teachers in the books, just like how Nina was the one who created the magical barrier of Garstang, which would later be torn down by the Alissa de Vries during the Thanos coup. Some mages mentioned in the story were little more than names in the books, but this journey gave them a character and a personality. You might not know, but even the student who was kind of an enemy of Alissa is mentioned in the books, as Janna is in fact Janna of Murivel, one of the most famous graduates of Aretuza, being listed amongst the likes of Laetitia Charbonneau and the Alissa de Vries. And of course, the mentions of the tunnels below the island, which were also mentioned in the books. I really liked that they expanded upon what we already knew. I have to say that I somewhat was surprised to learn that the Hale family lived around the year 1000, due to Octavia's lore notes talking about her land was overtaken by Nilfgaard, which would mean that the land she originated from, her homeland, would be considered what is now part of the main Nilfgaard. So not the Nilfgaardian Empire, but more like the capital area itself, as it wouldn't be for at least 100 years or so after that till they would really start expanding their empire. It was also nice to get that Alissa reference in there, and to have her play a small role near the end. But one of the most interesting parts, I feel like, is gone on theater appearance. If they keep doing this, it feels like they're setting up characters for a timeline around the year 1000, the early Witcher days. Maybe they have more intentions with this eventually, but it is really interesting to see where they are going with these journey stories. I left a few small parts out of the Aretuza's journey, as it will be better dedicated to a video focused on some of the sorceresses and teachers at Aretuza. I mainly focused this video on Alissa, as she was the main character in this journey. But what do you think of Alissa and this journey story? And what do you think will be next? Till next video. Bye.